Welcome back to another video, and in this one I want to get back into GreyPoint Media's superpower, the bit of podcasting. And of course, you're listening to this on podcast. We run these videos at the same time. We always strip them of audio and have them on our Digital Digest podcast. So if you haven't listened to the Digital Digest podcast, please go subscribe. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, everywhere you get your podcast. But I wanted to get into the 7 tips on how you can grow your podcast. Having started out our podcast, of course, right now, having started it out, it's still a new podcast and we're averaging around 10 listeners. But of course, I never take those numbers for granted. Personally, 10 listeners, those are a few listeners, but those are 10 people who have taken out their time in a day to listen to our podcast. So we appreciate that and we thank you so much. And to the listeners, may God keep blessing you. And in today's 7 tips on how you can grow your podcast. How can you grow from 0 to the 10 listeners? And this is we found what is working for us. Getting listeners to a podcast essentially is like growing a baby. You have to understand this is long term, and not everyone is going to be Joe Rogan. Not everyone is going to be Elon Musk of podcasting. What you need to understand is that you're speaking to people. So you have to respect that at all rights. And at number 1, we have inviting friends and family to listen to your podcast. It's really essential to have those first few listeners coming in and giving you reviews and giving you subscriptions or downloads, because it's important for the podcast networks to know that your podcast actually matters to some people, and they will keep recommending you to other people. And that's how the algorithm works, is that the first 10 come in, those first 10 invite the next 10, and before you know it, you're rolling in hundreds and hundreds of views. So invite your friends and families, send out the link of your podcast and tell them, hey, give me a listen, critique for me, am I doing good? I thought you can always enlist a reaction from the crowd, from the person who is listening. Should give you a subscribe, should give you a review, anything that helps your podcast be able to be picked up, especially in the podcast directories. And number 2, post all your podcast highlights across all your social medias. And this comes in, making short visualizers. I like what Brenda does with her podcast. That is views by Brenda. And it's really amazing how she makes these little highlights and she posts them on her Twitter. And the person who listens to a specific part of your podcast, they will like it and they'll be like, you know what, let me go listen to this whole thing. I know it's 2 hours, maybe 1 hour. Let me go listen to this whole thing because I want to get the whole picture of what they're talking about. So pick out a few 5 to 10 highlights in one podcast that really make it stand out and share them on your socials, so that the people who are not able to know about your podcast are able to find it in a place where they are comfortable, where they consume content, and they will take the time and go out there and then give you the reviews and the views that you need for your podcast. And number 3, we have joining podcast communities, especially across Facebook and then Twitter. This essentially is not help you maybe grow viewership of your podcast, but will help you grow the production abilities, the content, the structure. Because when you join like-minded individuals, you start to see the ones who are succeeding, what good things are they doing, the intros they make, the covers, the outros, how are they monetizing their podcast. So it's very essential to be part of the community so that you're not out alone in the desert and you're just fighting it out on your own. So join a few communities, especially Facebook groups, and it's always good to find a group that, of course, is related to your podcast. Especially now, like first, we do more of a business podcast and a business data and tech podcast. So those are the groups that we're in, and we're able to know what's new, how to do it better, and how to speak better. So I encourage you to really think about joining groups. Coming at number 4 is collaboration on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is one of those professional, you'd say, networks, but you'd be shocked that if let's say you're running a cooking podcast, there are chefs on LinkedIn. Let's say you're running a gymnastics podcast, there are gymnastic people, gymnasts, yes, on LinkedIn. So, but I find this is the most professional way you can reach out to someone. Okay, Instagram DMs is amazing, TikTok DMs is amazing, astronomical, but let's not forget LinkedIn, because that's we've found, especially when we're trying to get guests for some of the podcasts we run outside of in our network, is that guests usually are reaching out basing on how you reach out to them. So get some of the guests from your LinkedIn, and when they share to their professional networks, it's always a very powerful thing. Coming in at number 5 is that appreciate all your listeners and subscribers. Appreciate all your new listeners and subscribers. Appreciate, be grateful. Starting off this podcast, the Digital Digest, of course, getting used to having 100 views on all our other podcasts. Maybe like the Sooner Runner podcast does really well, averaging on almost 1,000 views. But we really appreciate even the 10 viewers that we have now, listeners that we have now, because I always like this analogy is that, let's say the people who look at the number of views and be like, oh, you're getting 300 views, that's small. The Joe Rogan podcast does 1.7 million views. I'm like, okay, wait a minute. If you get 100 people and put them in a room like this, you would know what it means. Like getting 30 people at a party is huge. So me, when I look at those small numbers, actually I usually find them to be very bigger than even the millions of viewers. You know why? Because you can never get a million people to be in the same room as you're doing your podcast, right? It's good on the screen, especially on social media, but those 30 people really care about you. Those 300 people, they really do care and they really do listen. So the small views, appreciate them. I love them. I'm excited. Like the 10 listeners that we have on our Digital Digest podcast, I wish the podcast platforms would even open up so that we could talk to them directly. We want to know what exactly that they want to hear from us and how better we can, make their days. Do we make it more fun, more comedy? But it's always nice to appreciate the 3, 5, 10 people that you get every time that you run out your episode. So we thank you so much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. So if you're listening, please give us a subscribe and give us a review. Coming in at number 6 is consistency is king. And I can't lie, this is a part where, running a startup and a small team, especially a team of 3, 4, 5 people, it can be really daunting. But with enough scheduling, we want to really solve that. But consistency in podcasting is key. I think it is John Lee Dumas. I don't know if I'm getting his name, but he did a podcast every day. And right now, I think he's in episode 2000. And I really can't wait when he reaches 5,000, he may do what Beepo did for his 5,000 every day. But that level of consistency is, at the same time, is what we are struggling to achieve. And I know we're going to get there where we're doing a podcast each and every day. But the consistency is what builds the momentum, is what builds the traction. And we have really seen it. I mean, like if you keep posting every day, even if you're just getting one new at 1,000, you'll have 1,000 new subscribers. So consistency is king. Do not forget that. As you're starting your podcast, always think about this, is that how am I going to keep talking about this forever until I die? Like, guys, when it comes to business and building business using tech, bruh, I could do this for the whole day non-stop. And that's what makes podcasting really powerful, is that we can do this real time and talk forever. And that's what will build consistency, because we enjoy doing this, and build consistency because it is simple to produce and it is straight out there going to the world. So consistency, look at the consistency element even before you start to produce your podcast. Coming at number 7 is something, of course, a lot of people don't talk about, but it's patience and hard work, Going back to number 6 is consistency is built in from having a passion with what you do, from pushing the boundaries with what you do. So it's very powerful to have that consistency already built in, so that patience and hard work become inevitable. Is that I usually tell, especially our designers, people who work with us in some of these projects that we work on, is that if your show does not have 1,000 episodes planned out, if you're not ready to go for 1,000 episodes, please don't even start it, because that's it. It's just hard work and patience. It's going to take 5 years for even this podcast to pick up steam, the so-called steam that people start looking, oh, this is an amazing podcast. So always prepare for that, is that it's going to take a lot of hard work and a lot of patience. So keep it in mind as you are starting to work out what you want to be producing. And it's just like some of my close mates, I have troubles with them. It's like you produce one season of podcast, it's amazing, people are listening, and then you're out of it. You're like, no, I'm done. that is not something that I would really encourage you. So if you're starting out a podcast, I really recommend is that keep it in mind long term. Keep it in mind that you are going to be playing this, and now especially for us here in Africa, whereby it's still even a new medium of communication. You have to give it 4, 5, even 10 years before people start to get on the internet. But what you want is that when people get on the internet, you are front and center. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and there's a link in the description. If you're starting out a podcast and you need some help, especially now that we're doing remote work, we're looking at all these remote production capabilities, you can be able to get in touch with us. We give you a free strategy on how you can build out this podcast empire, and how to actually monetize your podcast, how to actually build distribute all your podcasts across all the other networks, and building a brand on your podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to the Digital Digest podcast. We are on all streaming platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and there's a new one we're working on in the works that would really change the way a platform distributes its podcast, especially on the African continent. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.